Hi everyone, and welcome to my video on this week's topics for Chapter 3. In today's video, I'm going to be discussing social capital, strong ties, weak ties, and latent ties. So starting off with social capital is a term we use to describe the resources that are accumulated when we form community relationships that we often quote unquote trade for other things. We call these resources social capital because their value lies in providing access to others. Sometimes these resources may be actual or virtual, and they also can be held by a group or by an individual. These resources might include useful information, various relationships, the ability to organize groups, employment connections, etc. We often can see this in landing a job interview through connections or a friend of a friend. We also can think of this in terms of golf and golf courses. While, of course, some people do actually like to golf, a lot of times we see businesses using a golf course as sort of like a boardroom or a situation in order for business deals to happen in a more non-traditional setting. As stated in the textbook, some universities even offer courses on how to learn these things. So when it comes to social capital, it can be used as a way to kind of encourage people to join communities. A community is healthier and more desirable when there is a lot of social capital. And communities can build these social capital through reputation and structure. So this leads us to reputational capital. So reputational capital is based on the shared beliefs, relationships, and actions of those in the community. So these shared beliefs and the values held ultimately support a community's reputation, which leads us to that reputational capital. So a good example of this, as mentioned in the text, is Raya. For those who might not know, Raya is a dating app that a lot of times is called the quote-unquote Tinder for famous people. And this is because the applicants are screened using things like personal reviews, the amount of followers they have, things like that. So it's a highly selective dating network. So with things like Raya, the reputational capital is really based on the belief that those on this app are, I guess, more elite than you would find on quote unquote normal dating apps like Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, etc. This also leads us to talk about social networks and how social capital works in an online setting. So online social capital includes network size, member activity, and network feedback. Network feedback can contain things like activity quality indicators. So it could be your number of favorites and the information that flows through a member as well. Member activity and community participation play a really big impact on your social capital. The amount of member activity and community participation also can contribute to the amount of content that is flowing through your social network, which is the reason a lot of people turn to social networks. As the social capital declines, a lot of times the community experiences decline as well. So looking at a lot of our more popular social media apps like Instagram, Facebook, and Snapchat, as the social capital in these apps decline, participation will decline as well as its perceived reputation and trust. So this really can be seen through the influencers in a community, especially now that so many people are making their living off of influencing. If you look at social media apps like TikTok, when TikTok was first around as Musical.ly, there definitely was a different level of social capital than there is now. And that transition from Musical.ly to TikTok added a lot in that as well. Social networks also follow a lifestyle like products do, where social networks will grow, mature, and then ultimately decline. We have seen this happen before with things like Vine and MySpace, as you may remember. And so there is still speculation now about when will this decline happen with the more popular social networks like Facebook and Instagram as well. Another thing with social networks is the amount of community that appears. So emotional support is a form of social capital. So people on social networks who maybe are struggling to lose weight or fight addictions, like it says in the text, will often be successful because they join a group that helps them with these battles and people who are going through similar struggles. So we call this kind of emotional support bonding social capital. So this resource easily accrues online because of our accessibility to people who maybe do not know us personally or aren't even in the same country or time zone. This leads us to our different types of ties. So in addition to strong ties and weak ties, we also will be talking about core ties, significant ties, latent ties, and the differences between them. So thinking about these online networks and social communities that we have, we can easily connect with people all over, even if we might not have these, what we consider core ties. So our core ties are people whom we have very close relationships with, but they may or may not be in a position to provide solutions to problems, or in some cases, we might not even want them to know about these situations that we are facing. Online, there is more of a sense of you can be yourself anonymously. And so this drives people to these social networks. Although through the giving and receiving of bonding social capital, you can develop core ties online, or at least significant ties, which is next on our list. So significant ties are somewhat close connections, but less so than core ties with others within your communities. So online communities also provide other kinds of support, which would lead us to weak ties. And so because of the accessibility of the internet, that also increases the accessibility of weak ties. So weak ties refers to contacts with people where your relationship is based on superficial experiences or very few connections. So the opposite of this is a strong tie. So a strong tie might be with your best friend, you went to high school together, you have extended history of shared experiences as well. There also could be several connection streams between them. So weak ties would be maybe someone you're just friends with on Facebook, or you met in a group chat with someone or something like that. Weak ties also can be more prevalent when you're connected to several otherwise dispersed networks of people as well. This also can lead you to have bridging social capital, which is really how you can see that weak ties also have value. So bridging social capital is the value we get from others who provide access to places, people, or ideas we might not get on our own. So when it comes to latent ties, a lot of the connections that we make on the internet aren't active ties like maybe our core or significant ties. These latent ties are pre-existing connections that we've discarded. So the chapter also mentions maintain social capital, which refers to the value we get from maintaining relationships with latent ties. So an example of this is reconnecting with people through Facebook that maybe you were close with a couple of years ago. As we move through life, some people stay in our lives, but others lose relevance as well. This doesn't mean that latent ties are weak ties. So maybe your childhood best friend is a strong tie, but is now a latent tie because you don't keep in track as much as you used to. Understanding social capital and strong, weak ties can really ensure that you are connecting with your audiences in ways to build that social capital and create stronger ties to your community. This is especially important in nonprofits who are maybe just making that jump into the digital world or social media. You see this a lot with influencers who know how to make you feel really connected with them, or really enticed to buy the same products, or literally be influenced to prefer certain brands or reputational services. Understanding social capital and strong, weak ties can be really important in the nonprofit world, especially as many nonprofits have started to make that transition over to social media and digital marketing. with the rise of COVID, a lot of nonprofits had to stop having events face-to-face. And so by understanding the social capital and how that can really influence the way that potential consumers or volunteers, or maybe even those who may make donations to your nonprofit, is extremely beneficial. If you are able to increase the social capital of your organization or your digital space online, it can really drive people to be more invested in what your message is and what you are trying to do.